Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Do paranormal experiences really become more common around Halloween? Can ghosts be clumsy? Do trolls really exist?
In toy form, they do. Hey there, and welcome to the 289th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. I'm Ben, and all those questions came from my co-host and partner in the paranormal, my dad. We hope everyone is having a safe and pleasant Halloween today. Our theme tonight is the extreme paranormal. We'll be talking about some pretty fringe paranormal cases, most of which happened around Halloween. We also invite you to call in if you'd like to share stories of your own. You don't have to give your full name. The numbers for tonight locally are 401-766-1240 and 800-449-1240 from anywhere in the U.S.
But first, of course, our weekly paranormal contest. Last week we asked, where is the world's only official UFO landing pad? Kevin Callahan from Boston, you think he's Irish? Callahan from Boston got the correct answer to that. St. Paul, Alberta, Canada. The pad was built by local authorities as a tourist attraction in 1967 in honor of Canada's centennial of independence. As a matter of fact, our friend Paul Hellyer, who has twice appeared on the show, was Canada's defense minister at the time and flew into St. Paul to help dedicate the landing pad.
It's kind of a weird way to celebrate your Independence Day.
Well, it didn't do much for his political career either. Anyway, so
this week's question is: what U.S. state has the highest number of reported Bigfoot sightings? So get that question right and win an autographed copy of my dad's most popular book, Footsteps in the Attic.
Those are kind of rare these days. Anyway, to answer the question, does paranormal activity pick up around Halloween? I've always found the answer to be, well, maybe yes, maybe no. What happens at Halloween is the traditional end of the harvest and beginning of the dark, cold half of the year when, in ancient times anyway, many people died. It marks the Celtic New Year, known as Samhain or Samhain, and does the same for a number of other people, including many of today's neo-pagans.
So Happy New Year to all you Celts out there.
Because it was a dangerous season, it was considered that death, demons, and spirits of the dead had more or less free reign as it began, and particularly on its eve. Early on, though, the Christian church had a policy of deliberately adopting pagan feasts and turning them into Christian feasts. So October 31st became All Hallows Eve, or Halloween, and November 1st became a celebration of All Saints instead of a feast of demons and dead people.
Cool. All right, but we've never found that weird phenomena increase just because it's Halloween.
They do seem to increase if it's around the time of the full moon, though. That's because the gravitational pull, is a theory anyway, the gravitational pull of the moon affects electromagnetic fields just as it does the tides. Disturbed EM fields can do funny things to space and time by disrupting, overlapping, or thinning boundaries between parallel worlds. And this can briefly allow us to rub elbows with the people or other critters in those parallel worlds whom we, geniuses, generally interpret as spirits of our own dead, aliens, or cryptids.
The pagan traditions have stuck, of course, especially with the form of costumes, bonfires, and candy. They were actually bribes for the demons.
Yeah, well, I won't make any comments about today's kids. Anyway, so in the realm of extreme Halloween, we thought it would be appropriate to start with a report from 1976. A lot happened in 1970. That was we read a case on the air last night on our CBS show that happened to me in 1976.
Well, other weird things have happened then too. I can't quite recall off the top of my head. I'd have to look on Wikipedia or something. So,
yeah, well, I don't think your memory goes back to 1976.
No,
this manifestation.
No,
all right. A multiverse full of Bens. That's quite a concept. Anyway, 1976, and it was from Susan from Atlanta, Georgia. And Susan writes, Ben, if you would be so kind.
Okay. Hi, Paul and Ben. I really admire your work and your ideas. I even think I'm beginning to understand the multiverse. I hope I can get your opinion on something that happened to me when I was a kid. I grew up in Grand Island, Nebraska, a small Midwestern city with lots of college students, politicians, and tornadoes. Halloween was big in our neighborhood, and groups of kids would have a great time trick-or-treating. One year, I think it was 1976, we went out in a group as usual, but before we got very far, we started to notice that we had a silent friend tagging along with us. He or she was shorter than most of us and was dressed in completely black clothing except for a Mickey Mouse mask. That's really weird. There were about 10 of us in our group, and there were a couple of funny things about this extra kid. As we went from house to house, we talked and laughed as kids do. This kid always stayed in back of us and never said anything. As you know, kids will joke around, pull off masks, and always try to find out who it is. But there was something so strange about this kid that we kind of gave him a wide berth. Nobody really talked to him. We didn't feel creeped out, just sort of sad. We all became a little quieter. As a matter of fact, it kind of ruined our fun. Even later on, we couldn't guess who it was. Weird because all the neighbor kids knew each other. Even weirder was the fact that we went to a door for candy and the kid was never there. We noticed him again when we got back to the road. The weirdest of all was at one big house where friends of my parents lived. They were having a big party, and took a picture of our group outside the house, and I knew the kid was with us when the picture was taken. But when the picture came out and the guy gave it to my father, the strange kid wasn't in the picture. I've seen pictures that are spooky because there are ghostly figures in it. This one creeped me out because this ghostly kid wasn't in it. Hold on a second. I put the staple right on the words.
Sorry.
Okay, now I know that this could have been just a shy little kid tagging along with us that night. But you had to be there and feel the weird feeling in this kid's presence. It wasn't normal. What do you think?
Well, what do you think?
Sorry I completely destroyed the email.
Well, you didn't.
Well, now you'll just won't be able to keep it together ever again. Well, I don't know what I think.
You that's do just hear stories like this.
Yeah, but it's just kind of weird because I've never heard of anything like that before.
Really? Okay. Well, there are stories like this, but I always thought they were urban legends.
Oh, and, yeah.
Yeah, we probably ought to do a show on urban legends too. But urban legend essentially
like
is
the Bunny Man.
I don't know about the Bunny Man, but there were these legends of you hear them all over the place. You don't know if they're true. Although Mom has come home with a few she's heard from her clients, and I don't know, knowing the clients, it might be true, but
she's dealt with some weird people.
The dope who adopts an Australian wombat because he thinks it's a dog or something, and then it's a terrible, dangerous creature. That sort of thing, or the elephant that sat on the Volkswagen, or different things that you hear from time to time from day-to-day modern life, and they somehow have circulated in our society as they would in an ancient society. Various stories that supposedly have happened to people, and among them are little Halloween stories of little ghost kids showing up at doors and they disappear in front of people and all this. But this is the first time. And thank you, by the way, Susan, for sending this in.
But it's a really cool story.
Well, it is. And again, probably even more so because you really don't know if this was a shy little kid or something more or less.
That's just weird that it chose a Mickey Mouse mask.
Well, yeah, there are a number of interesting little tidbits in
maybe
this story that make flags go up.
Maybe it's like some archetype or something for like happiness or something. I don't know.
Well, yeah, Mickey Mouse has become an archetype in society. I don't know what that says about society, but anyway, this child dressed all in black with a Mickey Mouse mask. I mean, you can speculate in any direction. Could it be an alien observing human tribal customs? I mean, anything is possible.
I don't know.
The feeling of sadness that sends up a flag for me.
What does it say to you? Because I thought that was interesting, but I couldn't quite place my finger on why.
Well, you are about to make your first trip, hopefully during our Providence Learning Connection course, to the site of the Village of Voices case. And
someone mentioned that in my English class. But anyway, continue.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, we got on the whole subject of it because my
They know who you are?
No, but
okay.
They were like, "Oh, you ever been to that place that's that's like in Connecticut and like there's voices all over the place?" I was like, "Yeah, my dad was the first guy to go there," and they were like, "Oh."
Whoa. Anyway, when you walk in there, I remember walking in there for the time, and this is in the 1970s as well, you'd feel sadness. And it was really odd. But it was this kind of sadness that was rather mysterious in its origin. It wasn't as if you were sorry for yourself or somebody else. It was like a sense of heaviness. And very much what she doesn't describe much here, but kind of like the feeling in the presence of this kid.
Yeah.
If it was a kid. The thing that makes me really interested is because if this was a real kid, he'd be the first one up there at the door to get candy, you'd think.
Yeah.
But back down on the side where they notice him again. They notice him or hear her or whatever, and not notice. And then the photograph is interesting. But of course, the evidence would be interesting if it was in the picture and wasn't with the group. But here we have a reverse case where the figure is not in the picture and was there when the picture was taken. So I suppose that the picture wouldn't prove anything.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, very interesting. And people might ask, what is? We take our multiverse theories that we always apply to everything. What does that say about this?
Well, someone that is a neighborhood kid.
Yeah.
Who maybe there are different houses that aren't the places where they think that the houses are in this universe or whatever, world or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And that's probably why they couldn't talk to him, because as you said, the veils between the worlds are thin, so he could rub elbows with all sorts of critters.
Yeah. Well, the Celts believed that the veils between the worlds were thin at Halloween.
They were very intelligent people. And
that's
then
when they weren't
destroyed
each other. Yeah.
And destroyed by the Romans.
Yes. Well, anyway, historically, being that being as it may, I think of a case from England in which I was told about, where the man lived in ordinary guy lived in a neighborhood, some kind of job, regular fellow, had a family. He walked out of his house one day, had a slight instant of a little bit of blackness. That's happened to me. And all of a sudden, he was in a different neighborhood. Houses weren't in the same place. There were a couple of people he knew, a couple of people he didn't know. He freaked. He ended up at the police station, and they couldn't tell who he was. There was nobody by his name living, and then all of a sudden he went out, and then everything changed back. So I mean, this is multiversal, awareness. I suppose that it's
extreme
not at its best. Yeah. So anyway, but thank you again, Susan, for sending that in. It's quite interesting, certainly.
The paranormal has a lot of strange corners where we can run into creatures that go way beyond ghosts, as illustrated by our last email. One of our earlier shows was about fairies and other nature creatures or nature spirits, whatever floats your boat. We couldn't believe how many people wrote in about their experiences with fairies or fairy-like creatures.
Yeah, that was very interesting. We had weeks of people writing in about stories, very often that most of them had experienced as children, or that had been told to them by their grandparents, and then they experienced something after that. It's a basic principle in several interpretations of quantum physics that anything can exist. Anything that is possible, anything that we can conceive of, actually exists somewhere or somewhen in this vast system of interacting universes that we refer to as the multiverse. Some, like Ben and I, feel that these worlds and creatures are fully real, physical, and functional. Others feel that they are, this is a number of physicists who believe this, feel that they are indeed out there, but they are potentially real and need some species like us to come along and make them real by means of our own consciousness. That's the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, I suppose, in a way might indicate that.
See.
Whichever interpretation is true, if any, it means that creatures we interpret as the mythical denizens of folklore do exist in parallel worlds and do stumble into ours, or we into theirs, now and again. One critter we have never discussed yet on any program is suggested by Davina M. in Tucson, Arizona.
Okay, and Davina writes, "Hello, Paul and Ben. I'm wondering if you've ever done a show on trolls, and what your take on the subject is. When I was younger, my family and I lived in a haunted house. Thank God we no longer live there. And my siblings and I were tormented by many paranormal entities. We had a family friend who was also a medium come over to check the house out. She only spoke in Spanish, so I think a lot of what she said got lost in translation. I do remember she said she saw/felt trolls in the house. I'm very interested to learn more about this subject. Thank you for your time." We have a huge private library at our house. Just about every major book on the paranormal ever published is in there. Very few of those even mention trolls, because as I said earlier, all I could think of is the toy.
Right, okay. Well, trolls, as we generally think of them, come from cartoons, toy stores, and Scandinavian folklore. They are not generally considered nice, and usually are thought of as big, ugly, and not all that swift. Personally, I've never run into one that I know of. They are generally thought of as guarding bridges and entrances. I certainly hope there aren't too many around Woonsocket tonight, because we have lots of bridges, and we're the only town around here with the
Well, the bridges are rusting, so they probably disappeared.
They don't like rust.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, we were hit by another storm. In New England here, we're getting ready for locusts and, I suppose, frogs at this point, because we've had an earthquake, a hurricane, and a damaging snowstorm all in the space of a few months, so we're wondering what's next. So we are one of the few towns in here that have power tonight, so I hope our podcast comes through so people who don't have power can listen to the show later on. Anyway, we have lots of bridges, too, so hopefully the trolls aren't bothering the youngsters as they go on their rounds tonight. Anyway, more seriously, Ben, do you have any more thoughts on this? I mean, I have a few more thoughts, but go ahead. I think there might be something about the word you pointed out very wisely on several occasions that the word fairy just creates disbelief, because of its connotations. But that doesn't mean that some species like that.
Well, it could have a different word that could sound more menacing than fairies, like muck duck or something like that. I don't know. I think when we just think of
like something they make at that restaurant down here.
Yeah, probably. I have no idea. Anyway, so it's probably just the words that we use to describe these things that sound kind of goofy, because the word fairy is associated with like stupid kids things like My Little Pony and the Smurfs. But even then, like, if these things do exist in other in other parallel worlds, they could just as easily come over here and mess with us in that sense.
Yeah, they tend to blend with them. In Davina's case, it's interesting that a woman of presumably Mexican origin, this medium she talks about, would report one in Arizona.
Well, there's legends of this stuff like all over the place.
That's true. Well, that leads me to suspect that our paranormal who and where principle is coming into play.
So in other words, how you interpret the paranormal experiences depends on who you are and where you experience them. Actually, wait, I was going to bring up this question last night. If people that follow... You know how we always talk to goofy ghost hunters and they're all like, oh yeah, I've never run into anything negative in my life.
Oh yeah. Gosh.
Maybe due to their belief, they experience things differently than other people would. I mean, it's like voodoo. Some people think it exists, therefore it affects them. Some people think it doesn't exist, therefore the curses that the voodoo priests put on them don't actually happen.
Yeah, there is a certain amount of energy you put into the thing yourself. People are awestruck sometimes by some of the ways we interpret our cases. But I mean, look what happens when you open up to other possibilities other than the stupid Victorian interpretation of what this is all about. Then all kinds of interesting things happen.
A lot of stuff from the Victorian era. A lot of things from the Victorian era just mess with us.
Yeah, I think so. But
anyway, continuing. If you're in a living room and a wispy figure drifts by, aha, a ghost. If you're out in the yard and a disc lands nearby and you see wispy figures, aha, aliens.
Yeah, it depends on the context.
Yeah. So if you work in the lumber industry in Oregon and you see a huge ape-like figure, Bigfoot, especially if it's wearing suspenders and carrying a lunchbox.
Well, let's forget him. There.
Okay, if you work in the lumber industry in Norway and you see the same thing, you think a troll. So maybe it just depends on where you're from and how you look at things.
Yeah, maybe. Just to clarify for those who don't know this story, we did a show on Extreme Paranormal at one point, and we actually got a report from North Carolina, highway. I don't know if it was Route 95 or not, but it was very early in the morning. Several people reported a Bigfoot-like figure in a ball cap with suspenders carrying a lunchbox. Now, obviously, this has hoax written all over it, but we reported it anyway because, hey, what are you going to do? Okay. And we do run into a variety of multiversal creatures all the time. in a place like Davina's house back in Arizona in the days of yore, which reminds me of many of the multiversal crossroads we run into, troll-like beings are entirely possible. A new report, Ben, which you have not seen yet, just came in yesterday, from our ongoing major case in Connecticut we're always talking about.
Power.
Well, well, they must have escaped before the storm.
Probably.
Anyway, I'll read it later if we have time. There are now small beings that kind of sparkle that were evident to a guest in the house. Mm-hmm. Okay, and this particular place is like maybe Davina's house, a crossroads, intersection, Grand Central Station of the multiverse. The energies are such that all kinds of worlds overlap. You never know what you're going to see. All kinds of interesting species and creatures are passing through all the time. It's like the cafe in the first Star Wars movie, you know.
Yeah.
So and that's no joke. That's as real as it gets in places like this. But if you live there, it can be a bit disconcerting.
He doesn't like you.
No,
I don't like you either.
Right. So, and of course, then there's the question of parasites. I mean, they can come through too, and there seemed to be some indication in Davina's letter that there were some negative things going on. So, were these trolls parasites, or that they were interpreting as that? Were they translating the woman's words properly from Spanish? Presumably, I mean, she has a Mexican name, and presumably her mother must have spoken Spanish talking to this medium. So,
yeah,
there are a number of unanswered questions here that may have been factors in Davina's experience.
Yeah, well, moving on. There have been some ultra weird goings-on not far from here during this Halloween season, and one of them is reported by our good friend Lon Strickler on his phantomsandmonsters.com newsletter.
Okay, that's a great newsletter. I'm going to give a bit of a plug for that a little bit later on, but I wanted to report, this is only a few weeks ago, and it occurred in Connecticut, not far from where we sit at this moment. It was Sunday evening, October 9th, 2011, this year, at approximately 7:25 p.m. near exit 73. It's a Niantic Flanders exit in Connecticut, right near the shoreline resorts there along the Long Island Sound. And all cars on Interstate 95 South came to a complete halt. Now, as we know, traveling that road, that's not unusual.
Yeah, I know. But
the cause of this one was. As usual, the automobile backup was a few miles long, and no cars or trucks could move. It was a complete standstill. This is the person who experienced this. I don't have the name. My wife and I had just completed a wonderful dinner at the quaint town of Mystic Pizza, maybe, and begun our trip home to Hartford. I recall telling my wife this evening that had been one of the most beautiful, crystal clear blue skies I had ever seen. There were no clouds present. It seemed that the sky had 2 or 3 beautiful hues of blue. It was very breathtaking indeed, because the weather was so warm and pleasant. I opened the moonroof of the car to feel the breeze as we drove home. A sighting of one object in the distance of I-95 then occurred. As we were heading south on I-95 and passing exit 74 or 75, I noticed to my right, off in the distance, a stationary object. This object was a couple of 100 feet in the air and had blinking lights, approximately 4 or 5 lights. As we were traveling at 55 to 65 miles per hour, the road began to turn away from the direction of the object. I let go the image to maintain focus on the road ahead. I thought to myself, what was that? Was it a large, flat, rounded helicopter with 4 or 5 lights blinking? Was it a large, flat balloon with 4 or 5 flashing lights? Was it a large water tower with 4 or 5 blinking lights? If a water tower, where were the tower legs? I had to put it out of my mind to watch the road and focus on the fast-moving traffic. A mile or two down the road, we came to a complete stop on I-95. We were now near exit 73. All I could see in front of me was a long line of red backup lights. In my rearview mirror, I saw that there were white headlights, of course. I could not believe it. Here it is, one of the most beautiful evenings I had ever had, and yet I sit here in the parking lot on I-95. How many times has that happened to us? Mm. As we sat there in standstill traffic, I decided to look up through the moonroof on my right and over my right shoulder and to view the sky. What I saw next gave me a double take, then a shock. The object I had just seen a few miles back was here hovering. What I saw was a large, flat, rounded disc with 5 lights blinking on and off. These lights seemed to blink in a reticulating fashion. that's in a pattern. This object was approximately 400 to 5 feet above the ground and about 200 feet from the road. Just then I had another shock, and there was more than one object. This second object was moving slightly next to this first one. Object 2 was at a slightly lower altitude, possibly 50 feet below Object 1. These two objects also appeared to be within 100 feet of each other. Both objects were exactly the same shape, had the same number of lights, same color, and all 5 lights visible were blinking. It seems one craft's lights blinked in a reticulating fashion and the others just came on and off. As I focused on this second object, I realized it was moving very slowly towards I-95, us and the 2 or 3 cars behind us. I remember stating aloud, and he makes a reference to the deity, and his wife, being a strong Christian, I assume was insulted and ignored my comment. I am sure she was concerned I said this. She also does not believe in this phenomenon, and I did not bring this to her attention. I find that kind of funny. You're saying that you don't point it out to whoever's in the car with.
Anyway, you're just seeing things. Stop it.
I was in shock. I don't see that. I was in shock as I have never seen a disc in person before, let alone 2 objects at one time. I also knew we were in a position of vulnerability. We were unable to move until the traffic could move. I felt a little panic knowing this. I also wondered, were we being watched by these 2 floating objects? Were these objects observing the cars and trucks in this backup? I then thought for a split second there could they possibly be a third object, but could not verify that assumption. I had a strong feeling that there was a third one, but could not get a look at it. I just sensed it as another presence. As the cars began to move at last, I was glad we could leave the area. I forced myself to brush off what I had witnessed as a not-so-happy observation. As I traveled down the road, I had the inclination to look one more time into my rearview mirror. Sure enough, there it was in the rearview mirror, where we left it. I could still see one object with its lights blinking on and off near the highway. In retrospect, I now realize 2 things. When I saw the first object from a distance a few miles away before the backup, the second object must have been behind the other, or just showed up after we came to a complete stop. If I had not had any moonroof open and looked up when I chose to do so, I would never have seen these 2 objects. The angle of the objects was above and to the right of my roof, meaning it would have been impossible for me to see them. I know people saw this, and I am sure they wish they had not. Now, I haven't heard anything about this. Now, we don't generally follow the UFO news specifically, but I'll make some inquiries among our contacts in MUFON about whether this, because I'd like to have some corroboration of this. And again, these objects were disc-shaped, both had 5 lights along the rim, and it tells me the craft had more than 5 lights, perhaps 15 or 20 around the entire circumference of the craft. And this goes on and on. And it turns out there was a major accident causing this backup. And our witness goes on, not knowing how the accident occurred, I thought the police might like to know what I saw. I first contemplated their reaction. Would they think me a nut doing so? However, I rationalized after a day or 2, if I saw this while driving and focused on these objects, I may have had an accident. The cars had been moving fast.
Maybe they caused the accident.
Who, the police?
No.
Yeah, right. I don't know, I hope not.
Stop looking at it.
Anyway, I first contacted the dispatch officer at East Lyme, Lyme, Connecticut, the town that gave us Lyme disease.
Yeah.
With all due respect, I know a lot. I have some friends there, nice people. Beautiful. Anyway, a few days after this sighting.
Insult the town then.
Yeah, the aliens were delivering more Lyme disease. More limes. Anyway, the dispatch officer heard my story and referred me to the investigating officer at the I-95 crash at Montville. I shared the story again, this time via voicemail with this officer. A week later, not hearing back, I decided to follow up by email to the head officer at the police station. I inquired if they knew anything and to please share what they had heard so I could report this event to MUFON. It's like asking the government to disclose, right? To date, I have not been contacted. Do the police know something? Did others report this same event? I may never know. Perhaps they think I'm a nut. Anyway, and he finishes up. I would say that we would like to hear from anyone who was a witness to this. I mean, if you have all these people backed up on I-95, and I'd like to hear from this. from anybody who has seen this. So anyway, we're going to take a brief commercial break, and we're right back to finish this up and to move on to our next email. Everything you know is wrong.
Hi, I'm Ben Eno.
And I'm Paul Eno. Check out our show, Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, here on ON 1240 AM on Mondays on our new drive time slot at 6 p.m. The paranormal is not what you think it is. You're going to examine the whole thing from a whole new perspective on our show, and we expect that you're going to be very surprised. Do not check your brain at the door. You're going to need it.
Be there.
ON Radio, ON Worldwide.
Okay, and we wanted to, of course, mention our sponsor, Amazon Kindle, and I forgot the commercial tonight, so I'm going to have to wing it. I wanted to point out Amazon Kindle Fire is the newest product from this marvelous family of e-readers that Amazon has provided, and I'm preparing a course also teaching about something I'm teaching about publishing, and I was looking up some facts, and Amazon Kindle sales have now exceeded book sales, sales of physical books. So this is a phenomenon that is not going away. Time you get in on it. And for as little as $1.99, you can get Amazon Kindle Fire, which will give you not only upwards of 1 million books, but also movies, TV shows, newspapers, magazines, and that's coming out on November 15th, so don't miss that. Amazon Kindle Fire. You can get them at Staples. You can get them online, Amazon.com. Check it out. It's a great way to read books now, including 4 of my own. And we also, at most of the guests you hear on this show, their books are on Amazon Kindle as well. You can also get it through your iPad and all sorts of wonderful things. But check out the Amazon Kindle because it's a great e-reader. Okay. So we're back Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM and ONWorldwide.com. Originating from New England's beautiful but snowy Blackstone River Valley. And we wanted to give you our numbers again. If you have any Halloween stories of your own that might be of extremely interesting and bizarre nature, let us know. Our number, of course, locally, 401-766-1240 and 800-449-1240 nationally. So, again, anybody who witnessed that Connecticut UFO incident, I'd love to hear from only a few weeks back. And UFOs showing up at a traffic accident in Connecticut on Interstate 95. And also, that came from a wonderful daily newsletter, believe it or not, that's free from our good friend Lon Strickler of phantomsandmonsters.com. And Lon could use your help, by the way. And he produces this great online newsletter. It's completely free, and it's thick, too. There's a lot to it. Fortean and paranormal reports from all over the world. And check out the site, phantomsandmonsters.com, and is spelled out. Subscribe to the newsletter and consider donating, even if it's just a few dollars. Lon writes, quote, I am committed to keeping Phantoms and Monsters a free daily newsletter and publication. New subscriptions are being accepted. The balance sheet is beginning to level out as a result of the readers' kind donations and a variety of advertising efforts, but sustained assistance is still needed. So donations can be accepted through PayPal. There are donate buttons located on the site and on the blog. Or go to the PayPal homepage and send the donation to Lon's user email, lonstrickler at phantomsandmonsters.com, LONSTRICKLER, or simply send your contribution by mail. The address is on the site, phantomsandmonsters.com, folks. Great, great source of information. Okay, now we have a very interesting email that we read it on CBS last night, and it's so precious that I thought and it so certainly fits the realm of I guess extreme paranormal and extreme Halloween that we were going to read it again tonight. Last night's theme was clumsy ghosts on our CBS show, so this is a gem. So Ben, if you would, and of course it's from Nina in California. It just says California.
Okay. Hi, Paul and Ben. I see you two will be talking about confused ghosts, and I thought I'd throw one of mine at you. I grew up in a house near San Francisco, and from the time I was about 5, we were being haunted by what I can only call a clumsy ghost. There didn't seem to be any reason for it that we could tell, and nobody in the family died or anything, and from what we knew, everybody in the house before us lived a pretty good life. But there was this spirit klutz falling down the stairs, tripping over stuff, or at least that's what it sounded like, and I kid you not, we actually heard an occasional oof or ow, like somebody hurting themselves. Sometimes we wouldn't hear it for weeks. Then, especially when the moon was full, believe it or not, it would go on all day and half the night. Before long, it not only bothered us, it actually amused us. Well, it actually didn't bother them, it amused them. There were no ghost hunters in those days, so there was nobody to call when things got weird. But we actually got a kick out of it. We'd hear an "ah" from upstairs and crash when nobody was up there. And we would say, "There goes that stupid ghost again," or "Good thing he doesn't have any bones or they would all be broken," and then we'd laugh. To make it even funnier, when we grew up and my parents finally sold the place in the 1980s, my Uncle Ron moved in, and he was such a clumsy guy, or he was the most clumsy guy to ever walk the earth. He was always dropping stuff, especially on his foot. He never mentioned the ghost to us, but if the ghost was still in the house, they probably got to be good friends.
Okay, this is really interesting in many ways. Of course, it's very amusing. And, when people send in stories like this, we have no way of checking their validity, and we just assume that our readers are, that our listeners are intelligent people. We know that they are because of the good questions they ask and that they're being honest. So we take this at face value. There are a couple of things that kind of jump out at us here. One is that the clumsy uncle moved in to the house after these folks left. That's interesting because we very often find that the, quote, ghost in the house could be a future resident, because this is the way space-time seems to work. The multiverse is indiscriminate when you have overlaps of one world to another. It could be a future world, it could be a past world. So I find it very interesting that the uncle moved in afterwards, didn't mention anything about a ghost. They might have, as we say, collapsed the wave function. Just as when I stood on that this is when that young girl stood on the porch in Maine, had the shocked residents tell her that she was haunting the house, and then all phenomena ceased immediately for both parties. The two worlds perhaps came together. So what do you think, Ben?
Well, I think that makes a lot of sense, because when the uncle moved in, the phenomena ceased.
Yeah, that's well, as far as we know.
Yeah,
he never said anything about it.
Well, I think that if there was a clumsy ghost tripping all over the place, I think that's a topic of conversation.
But I have heard of this sort of thing before. Ghosts, sort of bumbling into locked doors and stepping on the cat and stuff like this. I mean, this sort of thing does seem to happen, and it's. I don't know. I'm a little nervous at times when people get used to the presence of something like this, as amusing as it may be, and as certainly as innocuous as it may seem.
Well, then at least it's not. If it was a negative thing, at least they had the feelings that it wasn't something negative trying to harm them.
Yeah.
It was just merely something that was going on.
Well, there always is a need for caution as we approach.
Yeah. I'm not saying no. They don't have to be cautious all the time. I'm just saying.
Oh yeah, no, yeah.
That they felt, oh well, this thing's not scary. It's kind of funny.
Yeah. Well, obviously, it certainly was. But in any case, obviously nothing negative occurred, and there didn't seem to be any threat. And certainly, once in a while, to share a story like this is, especially on Halloween, is kind of fun. And thinking back to the troll thing, I remember the past two Halloweens. I guess this is we're going into our fourth season now. Usually on Halloween, we've done the history of Halloween and different things.
And it gets kind of boring.
I don't know if it's boring, but I mean, it's maybe you're used to this stuff. You might get bored, but nobody else does. That we have issues where various kinds of creatures manifest and various things. And this is the first time we've done anything really humorous. The troll thing, though, makes me wonder that anything can happen in a place where there's this sort of cross overlapping and things of this kind in the multiverse. But anyway, this is a great story. So thank you again, Nina, for sending it in. I guess you live in Atlanta now, but well, that was the other well, whatever. Okay. All right.
It's okay, Dad.
I get that.
Just take it one minute at a time.
Here's one. This is an interesting one from. Before, because I'll forget about this if we don't. Rick McGowan in Oklahoma asks what's been going on with our podcasts, and I think I should perhaps explain, because a lot of our listeners, we supposedly have upwards of 3 million listeners, but I think most of them listen on the podcast, either from CBS, from ON here, or from our site, or I understand they're on iTunes. I never knew that.
Yeah, they
Nobody
should be,
tells me anything around.
They should be giving us money for that.
Oh, well, you look into that. We don't have any money.
Yeah, they should be. They should at least be giving us a percentile of whatever revenue they make on iTunes if they make people pay for it. But I don't think they do.
I don't know.
I haven't
They
looked.
should. Well, okay. Well, we'll look into it. Our lawyers will talk to their. No, anyway.
Our people
We're
will
having
talk
a
to
lawyer.
your people.
Yeah. Anyway, what's been going on with them is that the CBS they have a very odd system. I don't want to be bad-mouthing our other network, but they have a very odd system where these things bounce back and forth between Detroit and New York. We broadcast out of Detroit via a link up, and the thing goes to New York and goes round and round in CBS corporate offices and then comes out 5 or 6 days later. I don't know why that's the case, but they usually show up on our site on the Friday after the Sunday show. So, but lately they've been having computer upgrades going on over there, and they've been explaining to us that the podcasts have not been lost; they're just really delayed. So please be patient with the CBS podcast. We did manage to lose one from this station 2 weeks ago, which is very unusual, but that has been corrected as well. And last week's ON show is up, and we expect this one will be up very soon tonight, usually within 24 hours, thanks to the fine staff here at WON. So, that being said, anybody who is concerned about that, Rick in Oklahoma and everyone else, please rest assured everything will be okay. Okay, now this is a good one. This is from Lisa from Brunswick, Ohio. And Lisa writes in now and then with some interesting comments. And this is in reference to our show from a few weeks ago.
Wait, didn't we read this already?
I don't think so.
Okay. I just heard your show. Oh, no, we didn't read this. I just heard your show with Rob Howells about the bloodline of Jesus. I read The Mystical Life of Jesus by H. Spencer Lewis, Ph.D., FRC in 1990. I don't know what FRC means. What does that mean?
I don't know. Maybe some Brit. I'm usually pretty good on my British titles because of all our Brit relatives with titles. I don't know. FRC though.
Okay. Well, anyway, moving on. The original book was written in 1929. Maybe you have read this.
I've seen it.
It made sense to me, and I have not believed Jesus died on the cross since reading this book. I also believe he was married to Mary and had children. I hope Mr. Howells comes back and talks more about how about what he feels is to come. Lisa.
Okay. This may not be all that related to Halloween. However, it was a very unusual aspect of the paranormal, we think, that has to do with a lot of the things that are associated with this bloodline of Christ. Now, we don't take one particular point of view over another. I, however, spent 10 years in seminaries, and a couple of things did come up. One was that when I was a kid, my father would tell me stories of the Knights Templar, and our family, the Eno family, supposedly founded by some crazy knight named Henno, who was a Templar.
And supposedly was married to a serpent lady.
Yeah, that explains a lot of our relatives, but he certainly was this was the kind of person who was a shapeshifter, and all this baloney. Well, I don't know, I hope it's baloney. But anyway, there seemed to be. When I read some of this stuff about this bloodline and the Knights Templar, I said, my gosh, I heard those are bedtime stories my father told me. Everybody else grew up with Beatrix Potter and Peter Rabbit. And I grew up with Henno the Knight and his snake wife. It was great. But anyway, maybe it explains why I turned into what I did. Anyway, so we're very concerned about any stories that have to do with this. Personally, with our Eastern mentality, the idea because the idea of Jesus being married to Mary Magdalene didn't come up in our bedtime stories, but it is part of that story, and that's a big theme now in a lot of the fiction and the movies that have come up, particularly with Mr. Brown and his book Da Vinci Code. And
I wonder why that is.
Well, people are fascinated. People are disillusioned with, I think, the churches in general right now, and they're looking for alternatives. The Eastern point of view, which we always take, which I don't know, hopefully doesn't confuse everybody. I don't understand any problem. I don't see what's the big deal here. Jesus theologically, in Christian theology, was fully God and fully man. If he's fully man, he reproduced. I mean, that's what fully human people do. I don't understand the problem here. Their fixation on gender and sex really bothers me. I don't understand why that bothers. I don't know. It's crazy. So I don't really understand this whole issue. And then the issue of the bloodline, that they had descendants. unless they had, and we're talking about, of course, almost 2,000 years here, unless they had one child in each generation with no brothers and sisters, each of whom lived and had one child in the next generation, then half of Europe and half of America would share this same bloodline at this point in time. So what's that all about? We ourselves are descended from the Merovingian kings of France, and so is half of the rest of America and Europe. King Edward III had 9 children who lived, so 80% of the population of England is descended from King Edward III. So what's the big deal? Who's going to come out of that and claim? The implication is that somebody's going to come out at the end of this bloodline and claim to be a major king and descendant of Jesus, and therefore can take over Europe or something. I mean, I
don't think it works like that, especially when most of Europe is converting to Islam.
Well, I don't know about that, but I mean, a lot of people are going to say, well, that's great, it's very interesting, but who cares?
Pretty much, yeah.
So I don't think the whole thing is a big balloon. I don't know.
Like that lady we had on about the Antichrist.
Oh, that was another. Oh yeah, and she thought that.
Was it Prince William?
Prince William was a clone of. I mean, what on earth? I mean, we believe anything's possible.
I don't see any evidence to support that claim.
Not in this world. No.
Plus, even then, nobody really cares.
Well, she said he looked like the image on the Shroud of Turin.
You could look like the image on the Shroud of Turin.
Yeah, I have a beard.
Yeah, so there you go.
So anyway, I don't think this really goes anywhere, and I don't see how any kind of marriage would affect anything to do with the theology of what people believe about Christ.
If that's what happened.
I must say there was a question that came up in the seminary. I asked a lot of questions in the seminary that kind of got people looking at me strangely here and there, and one was that at the wedding at Cana, which is from the Gospel of John, the first of the 7 miracles of Jesus, that he went to this wedding with his mother, the Virgin Mary, and all of a sudden they ran out of wine. And Mary tells the steward, do whatever he says, him presumably being Jesus. What would she be doing giving orders at somebody else's wedding? That doesn't make sense. And of course, one of the party line answers would be, well, they had other children. The real party line answer is that Joseph had children from another marriage. It's possible. And there was one of theirs, so that's why she was giving orders. But, I mean, unless it was Jesus' wedding, why would she be, I don't know. But I have no problem with that whatsoever. What would that have, how would that wreck Christian theology or do anything except create a job security problem for the male establishment? I don't know. And Mary Magdalene is known in the Eastern Church as equal to the apostles. Mm. That is a very, very exalted title. So whatever happened, she was important, and whether she was married, that's another. But anyway, I'm glad that you enjoyed the show, certainly, Lisa, with Rob, and we do plan to have him back to talk more about this. And there's another fellow, Don Hammett, I'd like to have back, who supposedly knows where this very important body is that Rob talked about on the air, too. So we'll see where that goes and when we have a chance to deal with it. Okay, we have a few more minutes. Okay, here is another one. This is from Kevin. Kevin does not say where he's from, but it brings up an interesting point about back to ghosts again.
Okay. So, hey, guys.
It does say where he's from. Mesa, Arizona. Okay.
Maybe he didn't want us to say that.
Well, you should use the form online.
No, not my idea.
Don't be.
Hey guys, I love you and I love the show. Aw, thank you. I'll get right to it. I have intermittently heard throughout my life that ghosts are unable to cross moving water. Ghosts might be trapped, and I've been told inside a house because of the water in the pipes, and they are keeping them confined there. Or residual haunting might be caused because of rivers, creeks, and streams or other natural moving bodies of water are confining them within a given area. Personally speaking, while I haven't had any scientific basis for this thinking, this doesn't pass the smell test for me. As for you two, as you might say, it's not good enough. What do you guys think? Kevin.
Okay, well thank you, Kevin, that's a very good question.
Oh, he just says he doesn't care if you use my last name.
All right, so Kevin Baldwin from Mesa, Arizona. Thank you. All right. I don't know if I get to say that without getting in trouble with my son.
Stop it!
Anyway, The thing about water is very interesting. Now, I've often said on the show that in my cases over the last 41 years, I have noticed that water and electricity play a certain role in where paranormal events manifest. And I think that's because water that's not distilled, at least, conducts electricity and will have something to do with the electromagnetic fields. Certain electrical phenomena and water phenomena will sometimes play havoc with space-time. I have heard the legend that witches have trouble crossing water.
Monty Python, the Holy Grail. If she weighs as much as a duck, she's a witch.
No, water didn't do her any good. Anyway,
no.
These are urban.
That's why they'd tie them together and throw them into.
Yeah,
tie them to a rock and then throw them in the river and.
Yeah, it wasn't too good. But anyway, these old legends very often are based on some kind of scientific reality or some kind of historical reality, and which has long since been lost. But the belief continues, and there is a grain of truth in it, no matter how perverted or how much baggage it has taken on over the centuries. So, certainly this thing it affects. I know that a number of psychics have told me that when they, especially police psychics, there's one locally here too, who said that he will go to a bridge over water and to work out his feelings on certain cases, and knock on wood has solved several of them while hanging out over the Blackstone River in our case in our area.
Blackstone River,
and I've heard that from a number of people. So as far as but there might be something to this in the sense that certain paranormal entities, if we want to call them ghosts, fine, seem to be confined to certain areas. I can think of a lot of them. I had a case in 1998 where the ghost seemed not to be, if you want to call it that, actually it was a parasite, seemed not to be able to go beyond a certain radius, because it would, in some cases, would get in the car with me, and I'd get to maybe just about the border where the two villages kind of split, and it was at a bridge over a river, and the thing would disappear, and that's the reason I didn't really fight with it, because I knew it wouldn't be able to go very far. So there might be something to this. Electromagnetic boundaries would have a lot to do with water. Dowsing, for example, the art of using coat hangers or whatever to find water.
Or like holy water.
Yeah, holy water, yeah. You've got certain underground streams that seem to have an influence on the electromagnetics or the geotechnics of that area, and that could very well be true. But I don't think this applies to all, if you want to call them ghosts, or all entities. When you yourself are checking out a case, you and I work differently. Do you find that have you ever found that water has been a factor, or
I haven't really thought about it, actually.
Okay, yeah, because you don't think about it, you just do it.
Yeah,
That's
I don't.
Just as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've never really had to deal with it.
Yeah. So Kevin may have a very good point here. We don't think about it a lot, but I do notice, one of the things I do notice is where things are taking place and when, and in what geographic circumstances, whether there are rivers around, whether there are lakes. I remember one case, too, in Gloucester, Rhode Island, not far from here, by a large lake, and this particular piece of land, stuck out on a little peninsula into this lovely lake. But it was one of these grand central stations of the multiverse. All kinds of things were seen, all kinds of people, entities, and there didn't seem to be any point to it. It was just the location that was hot, as you might say, that was a place where a lot of these worlds seemed to overlap. And I saw no reason to believe it wasn't the water and the electromagnetics surrounding this lake. So Kevin brings up a very, very interesting point, one that I think we perhaps will deal with as we deal with cases in the future on the show. Okay, how much time we have there, Mr. Producer?
We have about 4 minutes. A little less. 3. 3 almost.
All right. So we got 3. Thank you. Yeah. I need that. All right. Okay. We do have, but just as he does also mention here, Kevin, residual hauntings might be caused because of rivers, creeks, and streams. I suppose that's true, too. As I often say, I was one of the early advocates of that residual haunting theory back in the 70s, but I rather quickly came to the conclusion that there was a lot more to it than that. As Kevin says, maybe not good enough.
Is there any scientific evidence to prove that residual hauntings exist?
Well, I don't know. I think it's a catch-all because people don't understand this. They don't approach it.
So it's recorded on the environment, which
I suppose that
I think it sort of makes sense because certain events do put dents in
space-time. Yeah. But they don't remain static.
No, they change. They can change.
Yeah, and I've changed them.
It's like the weather. It's not always static.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you really can't study the stars with a microscope. So, I mean, and if you insist on using a microscope from the Victorian era, you're going to get microscopic results. Okay? But I think if you look at the whole big picture, the residual thing, I have a lot of doubts about it. Anyway. Okay, we're going to be wrapping up here. But thank you, everyone who's written in. Please continue to do so. People tell us they really do enjoy these shows that we have for Extreme Paranormal or open lines and all the good stuff that we are able to talk about.
Yes.
So, anyway.
Podcasts of all our shows are available at www.behindtheparanormal.com.
And people are asking about our newsletter. We are still getting used to this new software. We don't have enough support to really do this newsletter. I kind of have to do most of it myself. So I do ask people to be patient. And people, please subscribe if you wish. A lot of people have been doing that. One problem was we lost our original subscription list. So we didn't lose it, but we were trying to figure out how to transfer it over to our outlook on the new system. And if anybody has any advice on that, we'd be happy to hear it.
We need a professional IT guy to help us out.
We don't have any money. So many thanks to our producer, Steve Bianchi, and we'll see you next Monday, November 7th, when our guest will be Canadian author and dream expert Craig Sim Webb, and the subject, dreams, strangely enough.
And on our CBS edition, on November 6th, our guest will be a reincarnation expert and regression therapist Mary Gates for a talk about Are We Our Past Lives? That will be live at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific on CBS New Sky Radio in Boston, Pittsburgh, Detroit, and Seattle, and online at www.newskyradio.com.
He's not going to know what hit her. Anyway, shouldn't have said that. We leave you this evening with a thought from Charles Darwin. A man who dares to waste 1 hour of time has not discovered the value of life.
Thanks for sailing with us on a great cosmic journey, and we will see you next time.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.